Hey everyone, John here, and going through the Direct, commercials, Nintendo websites, and various other sources including Nintendo Today, I found around 5 minutes of continuous Nintendo Switch 2 home screen footage. And so I wanted to not only show you all this footage, but also compare it to the Switch 1 to see exactly what is different. We're not really counting game chat stuff, but here is the UI for game chat in case you were curious. It's very much Discord. But let us begin with the home screen itself. And you may be saying, okay, show me the Switch 2 home screen then. This is it, and there are some differences compared to the Switch 1 home screen. For instance, on Switch 1, all the icons are square, whereas on Switch 2 they shaved off the sides to give them a rounded look. And on Switch 2, all of the icons at the bottom share a bench together. They're all sitting together on one big sofa. Whereas on Switch 1, they are on individual little islands. Most of the Switch 1 icons were recently updated to mirror the Switch 2. However, two of them are different. The first one missing is Game Chat. Of course, this is going to be a button on all Switch 2 controllers, but if you're playing with a Switch 1 Pro controller or Switch 1 Joy-Con, you'll have to go to the menu to open up Game Chat from this C. Also, the News button is different, and that's odd. Also notice the plus button down here. On Switch 1 this appears when hovering over a game icon to manage the data and storage, but on Switch 2 it's appearing on Nintendo Switch Online, and Switch 1 doesn't do that. And that's most of the differences between these two images. However, we have seen this in motion very briefly in the Paul Rudd ad. Yeah, that was it. But pay attention to the colors. On Switch 1, the highlighted box surrounding the icon alternates between light blue and dark blue, whereas on Switch 2, you've got a mix of purple and blue gradients just surrounding the icon and going round and round and round. Also, the beep is different. Listen to the beep.
Up to this kind of play.
Try and ignore Paul Rudd and listen again.
Up to this kind of play.
And now here's the Switch 1 boop.
Step up to this kind of play.
See? They're different, huh? But we've got even more beeps and boops to hear. Yesterday in Nintendo Today, they showed us syncing a Joy-Con 1 to the Switch 2, and this gave us our best look at the menu yet. Listen to all these beeps and bloops. There's also two new things we can click on in the sync menu. There's how to use the GL and GR buttons, and how to use mouse controls. And Switch 2 has 258 icons compared to the Switch 1's default of 147. And there's a few differences here. You can see again the selection box has that rounding gradient, unlike the flashing dark blue light blue of Switch 1. There's also an option to hide the shadow, which I think just shows you the character and not the backdrop behind them. And the preview of the icon itself is rounded here, unlike Switch 1, which is square. And it makes sense because it's rounded everywhere else, it's just for consistency. But anyway, let's alternate between Switch 2 and Switch 1 for the beeps and the boops. And likely the biggest change of them all is the eShop, and this is so much faster than Switch 1. When clicking on a page, it takes the Switch 1 8.3 seconds to fully load that page, and that's for Fortnite here. Whereas on Switch 2, Splatoon 3 loads in 0.5 seconds. Not even a second, half a second to load the page. Now you may be thinking, well, this isn't the full page, right? This is just the game's recommended for you feature. But we do see the full page being loaded as well, so let's just skip over to there a second. With Tears of the Kingdom, they go from this preview to the full page by pressing the Y button, and it's instantaneous, there's no loading at all. So this 0.5 seconds does seem to be how long it takes to boot up a game page, which is drastically better than Switch 1. But the main differences for the eShop. Number 1, your wish list is right there at the front, right there in the selection bar. Game Finds for You takes your friends' tastes and your own tastes to try and recommend you games, and everything else is pretty familiar. There's featured titles, there's product search, there's deals, there's bestsellers, there's recent releases, coming soon, NSO, and entering code. That's all pretty much the exact same, but the main difference is speed. And there is also the NSO app itself, the one that you get to by pressing the red button on the home screen. And this has been redesigned to an extent too. Instead of a tab that says NES, Super Nintendo, Game Boy, and then just sort of leads off, it's all under Nintendo Classics now. And when you click that, you get a very elegant system showing you all the games across these systems. And that was the case for the previous one too, but it was a bit more clunky and not really fitting that many titles in a screen. In fact, here there's one title, Wario's Woods, whereas in the new one, there's 24 in a screen, so that's quite a vast improvement. And this screen is pretty good on the standard Switch. This is basically a universal Nintendo Classics app, and so you can boot any game from here straight from this app, and not deal with any menus or juggling different Nintendo Classic apps. It's cool, it's just very slow on Switch 1, and I imagine this must be a ton faster, just like the eShop on Switch 2. Switch 2 is filled with accessibility options, and some of them come from the Switch 1, but there's now a whole menu with a bunch of other new options to enable. And one really cool thing is when using Game Chat, you can make it so it transcribes what everyone's saying. So if you're hard of hearing, you can see exactly what people are saying in text. You can also use a keyboard to type, and that uses text-to-speech, so if you can't speak very well, you can just type, and people can still understand what you're saying through automated text. And here's a video of that right now.
どれにする?
But while we're here, let's compare the keyboard as well to the Switch 1. And it's very similar to other differences we've noted. The cursor now has that rotating purple and blue hue compared to the flashing blue and light blue from Switch 1. But otherwise, the colors have just kind of been reversed. Instead of having a white backdrop and a grey keyboard, it's now a white keyboard and a grey backdrop. You can also now seemingly change the predicted words using the triggers now, rather than going up and just clicking and clicking and clicking until you find what you want. But let's talk a bit more about the settings. In the Nintendo Direct, we saw the video output settings, and it's pretty much the same. 480p has gone as an option, and now it's 720p, 1080p, 1440p, and 4K, whereas Switch 1 was 480p, 720p, and 1080p. There's a bunch of new display options too, including HDR output and dock output information. This list does go down quite a bit further, so there's other options we aren't seeing, but let's go over what we do know for now. Controller remapping has a much larger emphasis on Switch 2. This is under accessibility now, and there's a toggle right here to put quick remapping into the quick settings. So that's when you hold down the home button and you get the standby option and a few other things. There's a slight loading time between Switch 1 going into the controller mapping settings and it actually loading, whereas on Switch 2, it's instantaneous. But otherwise, these are very, very similar. There's a few changes, like on Switch 1 you get a big grid list, whereas on Switch 2, it's just a big drop-down list. They've also changed the language for adjusting the sticks. On Switch 1, it was change the left stick to the right stick, whereas on Switch 2, it's map to right stick. You can also still display the unit horizontally on Switch 2, whereas on Switch 1 that was only in the previous menu for some reason. But let's go further into the accessibility settings. There's a few things that Switch 1 had, but they were just scattered around the menu, whereas these are all now in the accessibility option. And the first thing is changing the display colors. These have the exact same settings. There's default, invert colors, and grayscale. But Switch 2's got a bunch of brand new options, including high contrast, just making things stand out more, and bold text, making the text stand out more. You can also change the size of the text itself, going from standard to large to maximum. Zoom is back by double tapping the home button, and it is pretty much the exact same. Only Switch 1 gets very blurry when zooming in on the home screen, because this is a 720p render. And we don't know the resolution of Switch 2's home screen, but it does appear to be higher res, which is a good thing. Turning the audio to mono is also an accessibility option now. They used to be under just the system settings, and now it's just here with all the other accessibility options, and that's cool. And we also get to see all of the text-to-speech stuff. You can change the style of the voice, the pacing of the voice. Have a listen.
Text-to-speech. Use text-to-speech. On. Toggle button. Vertical list. 9 of 11. Reads out text content that appears on screen. Pressing one of the control sticks will restart the readout. Not all screens support screen reader functionality. Voice type, type 1, button, 10 of 11. Type 1, selected, button, vertical list, 1 of 2. Type 2, not selected, button, 2 of 2.
Text-to-speech. Voice type. Type 2. Button. Vertical list. 10 of 11.
And again, this works with game chat too.
どれにする?
And speaking of game chat, we may have actually seen the dark theme in action, as you can see right here, everything is black, and this grey right here is very similar to the grey used on Switch 1's dark mode. So this may in fact be dark mode. That or this is just better for reading text in game chat. And I think this is everything I found. So what do you think? Of course, this is very similar to Nintendo Switch 1, but there's quite a lot of new options and just general upgrades, especially the eShop and accessibility, which does make this still quite exciting. But let me know what you think down below, and keep tuned for a lot more Switch 2 stuff. We are only, 4 weeks away at this point. We are so close, everyone, and I will see you next time. Bye!